Welcome to Life in Red.
And here we go. Harriet, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Um, I've always wanted to have a chef on because, food, who doesn't love food? And you do so many amazing things. And I can't wait to get into that. But my first kind of question for you is, being in the restaurant industry, I mean, how are things going for you and for it? I know it's not good, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Absolutely. Well, it's been really, really hard and really scary and kind of like a roller coaster that doesn't end.
Yeah.
It's been lots of ups and downs, and it's just, you know, as a small business, we kind of didn't get the help that we needed when we needed it. So now we're all kind of scrambling, and now there are some subsidies and things that have been now accessible to everybody, but we're also kind of playing catch up. And unfortunately, for some businesses, it was too little too late and they've already closed. And for a lot of us, we're kind of just grasping at straws at the moment. And it's a particularly tough time because November, December is usually when restaurants make their money to get through the winter, because we're doing Christmas parties and caterings and things like that, or offering things like some restaurants make lots of tortillas and things like that. And so this is the time of year where you know, we're crazy busy. We're, bringing joy to people and celebrating holidays and vacations and things like that. But this year it's pretty grim. I mean, we're making the best we can, of course, always moving forward with a positive attitude, but it's still there's some stark realities that we're contending with. Safety being paramount, so I do not begrudge any of the restrictions at all myself. However, the reality is that only being able to have 4 people at a table, uh, and trying to tell our guests who want to come in with a party of 6 that, we would love to have you, but Ontario law right now states that we can only have 4 people to a table. And so there's a lot of challenges with this time of year, and all of the pivoting and scrambling to try to get things, new programs in place. Like, that's where I found a lot of my energy is going to trying to think of new revenue streams. So I started making some frozen things. So I made some tortillas, but I also made some spatzel mac and cheese and some cabbage rolls. And a friend of mine made me some charcuterie boards. So we're gonna, be able to sell some charcuterie, but you get to keep the board kind of thing. And we have a bunch of like Erdinger mugs, or like some ceramic and some glass. So we're gonna try to do like a little beer pack with the mugs. Like, we're really just trying to find all the little things that we can in order to make it through this season. And then trying to just get those things off the ground, like logistics and staffing, and is it going to work? You don't really know. So it's been really, really tough. I mean, if there's one thing that I know about the industry, is that we're probably one of the most resilient bunch out there. However, I feel like I've been tested to my limits, and I've already owned and sold a restaurant, so I already have been through that pain. But this is something different, and it's really been really, really hard. And a lot of it too is that, from the public, like, they understand only a fraction of how difficult it's been. And for the most part, they've been lovely and understanding, but you definitely kind of come up against some clients, or just people in general who just don't quite understand the restrictions we're under, the health guidelines we're under, that it's not what I would like to do. We're in the hospitality business. It's usually our job to make you comfortable and find out how to make you happy. But with all the restrictions, it's been like, well, no, it's actually not. It's not us.
Mm-hmm.
And for public safety, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And so we've definitely had some backlash in terms of clients not getting what they wanted. So that's also been a bit tough on the morale of staff.
Mm. Yeah, you brought up some amazing points. Like, from someone who's totally outside the industry, you don't really think that you're right. Christmas holidays, like the Christmas parties, all those bookings, like that is a ginormous amount of revenue that, didn't think. But I think everybody, when we talk about restrictions and hurting business, restaurants are always kind of the ones top of mind where people are like, ooh, yeah, like, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty like the profit margins are pretty small, I guess, for restaurants. If I'm
Very small.
yeah, so like rely on the volume of sales when you have reduced capacity and all these different things that I can see how that hurts. But just to quickly ducktail off of that,
Sure.
you're from Ottawa, so a lot of people in Ottawa listen as well as the world. But where can people
Cool.
kind of figure out and get some of these things you were just talking about? Like, is there like
Sure.
website?
So I'm the executive chef of Das Lokal, which
Okay.
is 190 Dalhousie in the market. So we're not in the Byward market. We're just sort of down Dalhousie at the far end, closer to Sussex. And we've got it's a really lovely little bistro. It's sort of Northern European, German inspired bistro. So nothing is like authentic. I myself am not German, but I like to take inspiration from our friends in Northern Europe and the types of food that they have. Schnitzel, Spätzle, Glühwein, um, and play with them a little bit. I use sort of farm to table as much as possible. A little bit harder in the winter, but still doable. And I still have lots of farmer friends that I use. And I'm also the chef of the Danish embassy.
Mm. I loved
So
Amsterdam, so.
that's in that's
Oh, Denmark. Duh. There we go. My geography's way off.
Copenhagen.
Yes, right.
Yeah, so when they have events, I'll cater them at the residence. And then I am also the host of Scrap Cooking, which is a little YouTube show that was picked up by Rogers in Ottawa that focuses on teaching people how to use the scraps of their vegetables or their meat that they might otherwise throw in the compost and teach them how to make delicious things out of them.
Mm. I am curious. So when it comes to restaurants, I think, I mean, even more so in March and April, but I would say even recently, there was a large increase of people using Uber Eats or Skip the Dishes, these kind of delivery services. And then it started to come out that I mean, it's not the worst thing, but it's probably not the best thing just because there's a huge kind of profit margin that they take.
Oh, it's totally insane.
Yeah, can you
So,
explain that a little bit? Just because, you see it on
absolutely.
Twitter, but I mean, I'd love to
Yeah,
know more.
so the way that those companies work, so they're a third-party app. And so what they do is charge you a commission. Like if you're the client and you order, say, a burger and fries, they're going to charge me 30% of that amount of money
Mhm.
in order to make the delivery to you. But they're also going to charge you a delivery fee. and there's always there's a service fee as well usually. So you know they're very convenient, and I totally get them. And really what they stand for is they're really more of like a marketing tool, because in sort of the old school way to do food costing, 30% is your profit margin. So basically you make no money off of using Skip the Dishes or Uber Eats because they take your profit margin. Now, in the beginning, Uber Eats wouldn't let you increase your menu prices, but that has changed. So you can kind of make up the difference a little bit now by raising your price on the platform. So it would have two different prices, one if you picked it up at the restaurant and one if you ordered Uber Eats. So that's made it a little bit better. It's been really hard because like I am not someone who likes to use third-party apps. So I've we sort of helped found something at the beginning of the pandemic that was more local, called Love Local Delivery. Wasn't meant to be a long-term thing, so it eventually didn't work out in the to be a business that is sustainable. Like, it was really just to help get us through at the time when we thought it would be 2 weeks or a month. But I'm definitely always looking at different alternatives to them, because I do find it really gougy, profiteering. The fees that they charge people is pretty outrageous, and so, and in the end, you're not helping the restaurant all that much, because they're not really making any money. They're just sort of covering their bases.
Right. It's kind of like you hope they try it and then like it, and then, maybe they'll come back. And I mean, in a time when we can go sit down.
So it's kind of a way to reach a new clientele that you might not have been able to reach through traditional channels or your own social media. So really what it ends up being is sort of like an advertising.
Right. I don't want to spend it all on doom and gloom here. So I'd love to hear, how did you fall into this line of work, this love of food? Everyone loves food, but to make it your career, what prompted you to do that?
Well, both my parents are amazing cooks. I was an allergy kid, so I was allergic to everything. So we made food at home all the time. And but it didn't even occur to me until I started dating a restaurant manager who loved to cook at home. So he's sort of like, when your parents are cooking food, you're like, yeah, it's good, but it's food. It's just nourishment. And he kind of like opened my eyes to the joy and the creativity and the presentation and the smells and the real beauty of it. And then I kind of went, oh, right, I think I should do that. And then I told my friends, and they were like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I went, oh, what do you mean? They went, well, you make food, you talk about food, it's part of your life. And it didn't even occur to me. So I went to school for it. I was also the hostess. My first restaurant job was at the Black Tomato, RIP, as a hostess, and they didn't have a dishwasher on during the week. So I would do the dishes. And so a friend of mine was in the kitchen as a cook. And so I would ask him a million questions about what he was doing. And so the two of those things kind of combined sort of sparked the idea to go to school for it, which I did. So I went to Algonquin and graduated in 2007.
Have you ever seen the movie Waiting? How close is the restaurant business to that movie?
Depends on where you work.
Oh, right. Okay.
In some instances, very, very accurate. In other instances, is like the bane of your existence. So people think that, it's like torture to your soul, that's how some restaurants operate.
Right.
But there's lots of shenanigans that happen in restaurants. Famously is usually not necessarily towards customers, but towards each other. So if you're a rookie, there's lots of hazing, where we'll ask you to go next door to the neighboring restaurant and get a bag of steam, or the banana peeler, or the Corona delimer, or the bacon stretcher, all of which do not exist.
I was going to say the delimer. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of
that. Yeah, so they're all things that don't exist. So you send them, and there's lots of fun stories of many restaurants being in on whatever the joke is. So they just say, oh, we just lent it to so-and-so's restaurant. So they send the poor kid on a wild goose chase.
It's ever since I saw that movie, I was like, I'm never going to be mean to a server ever. I don't want that to happen to me.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that if everybody did at least one shift, if not a week in a restaurant, we'd be a way nicer world.
Yeah, I've heard so many horror stories from my server friends, whether it's from management or from customers, just how ridiculous it is in some cases. I mean, you also get nice, lovely customers as well. But
Absolutely, I've lived through it, both customers and management. You know,
right,
it's an old school business, and it needs to be changed, and it's on its way.
right,
My hope is that the pandemic has shed a lot of light on some of the systemic problems about restaurants, and educated the public a little bit about how they actually work, because most people think restaurants are rolling in money, and really we're always struggling, um, and don't quite understand how much it costs to run a restaurant and why. And then but even just some of the behaviors in restaurants are really old. They've kind of gotten a little bit of a pass for some reason as to, some sexual misconduct
mm,
or labor laws, or, so I personally think the whole system needs an overhaul, to make it fair for everybody. It was built on exploitive labor,
right,
and the tipping system is exploitive. The wages that people are getting paid in the kitchen is exploitive. The hours you're supposed to work without overtime um, or breaks is exploitive, and the whole thing was built on it. Like,
hmm,
so I kind of feel like it's got to come down a little bit, but I'm hopeful that in the once the dust settles a little bit, there might be a little bit of room for positive change and progressive change within the industry, at least within restaurants that want to. There's lots of us, um, that want to make it better. Um, I just think we might need to collaborate.
mm,
We've all been doing it in our own silos.
right. Do you think it's possible to kind of reform at least that pay structure? That's always the big one, again, that everyone kind of talks about is the tipping system. And, you know, you always tip your server, but then there's kind of like older generations. It's like, I'm not tipping if it's bad service, like, all those types of things. And I know there's a little bit of an argument of, well, if we had to pay them, like our employees, more without this tipping, then food would go up and then no one would come out because it's too expensive. Like, at least in your opinion, is there a way to make that kind of work?
Yep, I do. I've given it a lot of thought. I don't think North America is ready for a no tipping system.
Mm,
Um, it's, the tipping system was created in North America, and it um, was, and people really see in North America really seem to like the control they have over the service, over the food.
mm,
If so, they like that aspect of, if it's not good, I cannot tip. And I think actually removing that from the equation, um, will hurt the industry more than it will help, even though I don't necessarily agree with tipping as a whole. I think trying to get everybody to change is too much. So they have tried it in New York City and several other cities in the US, trying to do what's called service included, which is a no tipping system, but the you see it on the menu, so it's reflected in the menu.
mm,
But that means that the menu price is a lot more. So you kind of get this like other negative thing where you've got this sticker shock right when you get there. So then
right.
there seems to be a strange psychology of it. Well, now my $40 plate or my $30 plate costing $40, my $40 plate costing $50. Well, it better be good. It's $50.
Right.
So for me, I don't think that system works. But what I perceive as the more fair system, and I've actually implemented it a little bit at Das Lokal, is, pardon me, is to make the tipping distribution more fair. Because what ends up happening is that servers get paid less per hour than minimum wage, which not everybody knows that. But so in Ontario, they get paid 12.10 or 12.20, I believe. Whereas now the minimum wage, just regular minimum wage, is 14.25. So then they work for tips, and that tip covers their minimum wage. And then the kitchen gets paid a little bit more per hour, depending on their skill level and depending on what kitchen you're in. But it's not nearly as much as it should be. But then the front of house tips the back of house, just like a percentage usually of the food sales that then gets divided out to the kitchen as a whole. So where one server is maybe giving like $50 to the kitchen, but that $50 is now getting split between 5 people. So what I am advocating for is I don't think servers should be paid less than minimum wage, period, and that the tips are more evenly distributed between the front of house and back of house. So what we've done at Das Lokal is that the servers start at $14.25, just like anybody else. And if they have more experience, they're paid more per hour. And then when it comes to the tips, we do it on a per shift basis. And 50% stays in the front of the house and is divided between the servers that work in the front of the house. And then 50% is given to the back of the house and then divided that way. So usually there's like more people in the back of the house than the front of the house. It depends on the restaurant. Sometimes it's the other way around. But I think that way you kind of get a little bit more fair distribution of the money, whereas everybody kind of walks with roughly the same amount depending on how much they worked. Instead of it being, I worked 3 hours, I make $300, I give you $20 to share between 5 people.
Right. Seems fair. I mean, I see where you're going with that. A lot of math involved with food, which I never would have thought, but it makes sense. Here's something that I've always kind of wanted to know. A lot of people think they're decent cooks. They're good cooks. You know, like you said, your parents like good cooks, but like, I mean, there's a difference between being a good cook and a chef. So I'm curious, you know, how do you like come up with these recipes? Most of us can kind of cook through a recipe and follow the directions, and there you go, we have it. We have what this person intended us to have. Whereas, like, you know, as a chef, you're totally creating these new dishes, adding your own ingredients, figuring out the kind of the balancing act. How do you go about that process? Because it to me, it's fascinating when you come out with this like beautiful dish of food.
Well, everybody, it's like any artist. A lot of it is learning fundamentals of your craft. A lot of it is experience in what you have learned and from who. A lot of it is just working within the industry, and a lot of it is time and your own background. So, but I mean, like, you know, learning music, the more music theory you know, the more different paths you can go down in order to do it. And it's not to say that you have to have the theory. Some people are just naturally inclined to do it, but it does help. So when I'm making a menu, I am often thinking of, you know, what is the desired texture and flavors that I'm going for, and what are things that have those textures and flavors, and do those things go together, and how can I combine them, and is there a better way to do it? And or sometimes it's just, what do I have in the fridge, and then how do I combine those flavors together? Because knowing the fundamentals of flavor profiles and texture and cooking methods, that I can kind of create something all together. But it's sort of a culmination of years of training, really, be it formally or informally or just on the job.
Right. Like it always, you know, me, I like to cook with garlic powder and chili powder. I'm just like, yeah, this is good. Gives it a little bit of kick. What so I know your restaurant, you said like Das Lokal is more like Northern European. Um, what kind of like cuisine around the world kind of like inspire you mostly? Like when you're maybe doing your own cooking, and I don't even know, maybe you're a chef and you're like, I cook at
Oh,
work.
I love food from all around the world.
Okay.
I I I love for me, I really love sort of South American, Mexican, and then sort of Southeast Asian food.
Mm,
If I'm cooking for myself or just those flavor profiles. Like I have had the good fortune to go and travel to Vietnam to visit a friend of mine who used to work with me, who opened a Bao restaurant in Hanoi called Bao Wow, and hang out with him in Hanoi. And that was incredible, my trip. And then I also had another friend who used to work with me that has a restaurant in Mexico City, and I got to go and hang out with him in Mexico City, and we went to Oaxaca. And but just like those types of flavors, I love hot sauce. Like I
mm.
love chilies, I love spicy, I love curry, I love all sorts of like really punchy in your face flavors. um, so for me, that's what excites me in terms of an eater.
What was the experience like in Vietnam cooking? Like I know we have Vietnam restaurants here, pho and from Chelly. What was it like cooking there? And I asked this because I remember watching a documentary on it was called Rats, and they went to Vietnam and they were cooking rats. And of course, everyone's going to think that's gross, but in North America at least, we're like, oh, what's going on there? But like, what's like the food like really there, and what was the experience learning how to cook uh, over there like?
Oh, it's amazing. The food is incredible. It's so flavorful. It's so fresh. Um, they, I mean, it depends on where you are in Vietnam. So I spent the majority of my time in Hanoi, and they've got a dish that I loved called bun cha, which is like vermicelli and charcoal grilled pork and this little broth, but the broth comes on the side with like leaves, basil, and all sorts of stuff that you kind of rip into your broth, and then you dip the noodles into the broth. It was delicious. But it was all the little stalls, like it's the street food that's incredible. I had an amazing home cooked meal by Long's mom, which was incredible. But it's really, I had such a great time there. It was vibrant. It doesn't get super cold, super cold. It's colder than you think it was, but it
Mm.
was maybe like 10 degrees. Um, but in Hanoi at least. And so there's lots of open air markets, and it's just a noisy, beautiful bunch of people, and just busy. Like it's a kind of chaos that I found really cool.
Right. I had a friend who went there and told the story of this like fruit that smells like dead people or something. And I remember trying it here with a couple of friends, and like it was actually okay, but like it tasted more like onion, but like the smell was so bad. And she said that
Oh,
I
it's
can't remember.
durian.
Durian, yes. She's like, you could
Yes.
just smell that everywhere with the street food, at least where she was.
Yeah, it depends on where you are for sure. Yeah, durian is sort of throughout Asia. It's a very fragrant fruit
Mm.
and not to everybody's taste. There is a pretty hilarious little video collage of cats being introduced to durian and having adverse reactions, and it's very hilarious.
Oh, I'll go check that out.
Yeah, the fruit itself is kind of custard like. You can kind of make it like it's a huge fruit, and it's spiky. So like, and it grows super tall. So they have these nets to catch them. I find it super cool. But yeah, it's not for everybody, durian.
Yeah, no, it was interesting, but yeah, it smelled so bad. You have a YouTube channel, and I'd love to know where this idea of scrap cooking. The YouTube channel is called Scrap Cooking, but the idea behind it, like, was this like a light bulb moment for you, or is this kind of years of just in the restaurant? You're just like, I gotta find something to do or implement this.
It's definitely years in the making. I've always been very environmentally conscious. I've always been very um, waste conscious, and well, I'm not. Nobody is perfect, and and I'm much better at the restaurant with waste than I am in my own house. It's definitely been long time in the making. Being in restaurants and seeing things that I knew could be used for something and not understanding why it would just go in the garbage, and being like, okay, well, maybe I'll just save these and then I'll make something with them. And so it sort of ended up being years and years of doing that. And so I've kind of had all these little ideas and tricks for using stems of things, or leaves of things that you use the roots for, or things like that, or bones or meat scraps, or things where I just see things go in the compost and be like, no. So I kind of took it on myself before I was a chef, while I was just a cook, to kind of like collect them and do something with it. And then I really enjoyed the kind of challenge of that. Like, okay, well, what can I do with that? Can I do something with this? And then as I became a chef and was in charge of my own kitchens, I was able to control what went into the garbage or the compost or what didn't. So I sort of ended up implementing a lot of like, okay, nothing goes in the garbage unless I say so. More specifically at Beechwood, it's the restaurant that I owned and then eventually closed. But yeah, so then I had a little bit of time and control over, okay, well, now I've got all these stems of this, like, is there something I can do with it? And then, okay, what if I did this? Well, okay, well, that didn't really work. So what about this? And then just trying to find creative ways, and some of that is research. The internet is full of good, useful tips as to how to use whatever scrap you're looking for, and some of it is trial and error, and read something here and implement it, and then make my own decisions, that kind of thing. So I've had this idea of sharing that accumulated knowledge with people. I just didn't know what kind of medium it was. I didn't know if it was a book or a blog or a vlog or whatever. I had a chance working meeting with JF Bay. I helped them do a video for Mayor Potts Pans, and I sort of floated the idea by him because we seem to work really well together. And he was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. When we're not so busy, I would love to be a part of that project. And then this was last December. And then, January, February went by, and then we had a pandemic. And I sort of said, I was like, oh, maybe we should, maybe now would be a really good time to do this project. And he agreed. And so we started doing it, and it's been going pretty well. And then we actually got picked up by Rogers. So Sundays at 8:30 on channel 22 in Ottawa, or rogerstv.com at 8:30 on Sundays. You can watch the show, or Scrap Cooking on YouTube. And so we've been releasing a new episode every week. And it's been really fun. Totally different medium. I'm not used to being on screen, but hopefully picking it up.
Well, you do it quite naturally. I never would have known you didn't have too much no experience or anything. And yeah, it is like a lot different. My background's in radio, and it's one thing to do a podcast where I'm talking to somebody, it's easy to go off each other. But when you're just by yourself talking to a camera and you're trying to explain something, it's a weird dynamic. Everyone's like, oh, I could probably do it, but then you get in front and you're like, oh yeah, this is weird.
Yes, well, I am glad that I'm not by myself. I do have JF with
Right.
me to guide me a little bit.
When we talk about food waste, how much would a typical restaurant, waste in food, throw in the garbage? You see in the movies, Hollywood, I mean, how many times, like the more homeless are going in through the trash bins at the behind the New York restaurant to get dinner and all that. Like, how much is that a big problem, do you think?
So it depends on where you are. I would say, yes, there's lots of waste in restaurants. It's not necessarily like full, like it's not like plates of food. It's like that's just like the scraps of what's left over by the client. But it would be, maybe not managing their waste very well, like managing first in and first outs and things like that, and things spoiling. You'd have a little bit more of a problem with. I'd say actually the bigger culprit is grocery stores, um,
Mm,
in terms of waste, but there's definitely lots of waste in restaurants, and it can go down. And on an environmental aspect, one thing I would love to see change in the progressive restaurant vision I have is that restaurants compost more. The problem being that for regular folks, it's part of your taxes. So your garbage and compost gets taken away. For a business, we've got to pay for it.
mm,
So you pay for garbage, you pay for recycling, you pay for compost. They're all separate. Like they're within the same contract, but they're all separate pickups. They need a different truck. They go to a different place. So it's quite costly to compost. And so a lot of restaurants don't recycle and they don't compost. And that has always
mm,
broken my heart. There's lots of amazing progressive restaurants. They exist 100%, but the majority don't recycle, don't compost. And really, at the end of the day, like when you send your food scraps to landfill, they actually turn into methane gas because they're not in the conditions to compost back to the earth. And that's actually something I didn't even know until a couple of years ago. You think it's going to the garbage, it's of the earth, it will go back to the earth, right? That's sort of your mentality. But the reality of it is that there aren't the conditions there in the landfill that allow the food to break down. It needs heat, it needs air, it needs oxygen, and time, and some microbial enzymes that happen to be there. But in a landfill, it's really that there's a lack of oxygen. Um, so it doesn't have the oxygen it needs, so it actually just breaks down and turns into methane gas.
right.
So I think if we were able to compost more, and people composting at home, 100% awesome. But I think what we need is a more industrial level, be it starting with small places like restaurants and cafes and moving up and towards bigger industrial things. I think we would do a lot of good there.
This is an off the cuff idea as you were talking, so might be dumb, but humor me for a little bit. Um, would there not be a way to like create some sort of system where like you said, these restaurants, cafes, like kind of compost, and like they maybe they own a farm or they work in partnership with this farm to like use the compost? Because I know I had an agricultural expert, and farms have a huge issue with the soil because they you monocrop and they just steal all the nutrients. Like to like work in tandem, so you grow your own food kind of with this farm partnership, which would save you money, and then you're using your compost for that. Like, is that like a system that could exist theoretically?
It can and it does.
Oh,
There
okay.
are programs
I
with
thought it was
farms
genius.
that do exist. There's one in Ottawa with Mariposa Farms that's not necessarily to be composted, but actually to be pig food.
Okay.
So but it also requires you needing to sort. So you're not going to feed the pig, right? So uh, those kinds of things. So
Right.
so there's also some and things that you would also put in like an industrial garbage are different than what you would put in something that's going into a farm. So you're not going to put paper towels, and like there's certain like harder things like bones or things would be harder to compost in a just one that you're doing on the farm, instead of having the industrial composting where they've got the controlled heat and the enzymes and the air going through it, so that I think on a small scale, 100% totally doable. Partnerships with one restaurant, 5 restaurants, 10 restaurants, and a farm. But I think on an industrial level, I think that's where we could see a lot of a big shift. But I believe that would require a lot of political will and incentivizations, which I'm really hoping come down the pipeline as our climate crisis starts becoming at the forefront of our policies.
Yeah, I mean, there's two kind of competing things there with restaurants. We have like we talked about at the top with the pandemic, and how are we going to create a system on the other side of this where we can help restaurants thrive and catch up and make it that they can survive, right? Because right now, like you said, everyone's playing catch up if they're even able to survive at all. And then we have that climate part as well, where we're gonna have to do really kind of progressive and I don't know what the word, I want to say intense, it's not the word I'm looking for, but
Drastic.
yeah, drastic, just very like and direct programs where we really can start to make an impact on the climate and what we're doing. So you're right, the pandemic is kind of like this perfect kind of start fresh if we can, but trying to get like political will on that, like they're just it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Absolutely. But it is political will that is going to be what does it, be it on a municipal level, provincial, or federal level, be it on a global level, could be international too. But, there's a lot to be said for some mandated incentives. Like if you're using, like one thing with compostable containers even is that there's no like standard, and everybody's municipal composter will take some and not all of them, and there's no way for them to tell whether that one's going to work. So a lot of them don't actually get composted. So it's kind of like a all for naught, which is entirely frustrating. But there's definitely, if there was, political will to say, okay, all compost facilities need to be able to compost these types of containers, maybe set up a body to be like a certification, be like, this is green friendly, so it can go in the bin, so it's able to be sorted better at the facility. Perhaps if there's an incentive, municipal incentive, that if you compost, you get a tax rebate. And if you use these kinds of containers, you get a tax rebate. Then more people will be using those containers, and they are expensive and prohibitively so to some businesses. So maybe there is some kind of rebate for buying them. Perhaps now that there's all of these people buying these green containers, the economies of scale kick in, and there's more production of them, which makes the price go down. So there's some things I think that it's sort of, but industry on its own isn't going to do it, because if it was, it would have already done it.
Excuse me. I can tell you put a lot of thought into all this. I like that. Like you can tell the passion and all the insight. Excuse me. Do you think this idea of scrap cooking, could that, would there be a demand for that in restaurants? Like, I think when I think of restaurants, people always want this like fine dining experience. Are you able to do that with scrap cooking, or like would you be relying more on like environmentally conscious people to sustain that?
No, it's both. So in old school kitchens, brigade kitchens in France, one of the most important people in the kitchen was the garde manger. Nowadays, garde manger just means the person who works the cold side, does your salads and your cold apps. But back in the day, uh, in France, the garde manger was the person who, it means the keeper of the pantry. And that person who was the keeper of the pantry was in charge of using all the scraps to make something delicious. And that's where you get a lot of your pâtés from, and your lots of your soups and lots of things like that. So it really is a very important function within the restaurant that I actually think we've lost a little bit. We sort of lost that creative aspect of finding what you have and making something delicious out of it. And I want to bring that back. I want to bring that back to restaurants, but I want to bring that to the consumer at home, because we're also kind of behind the rest of the world in that way. We're a bit we've been fairly privileged in terms of what we've been told is the best part, and that the best part is the only thing we want to eat, but that is not what makes things delicious. What makes things delicious is how you cook it and how you treat it and what you do with it. So most of the rest of the world uses every little piece of whatever they have and find a way to make it delicious and amazing. And some of those really famous dishes from around the world are just that. They're scraps that people have used, you know. A lot of it came from poverty, a lot of it came from slavery, a lot of it came from just only having what you had and trying to feed yourself and your family and make it taste as good as you can in the process. So I really think we've lost that art, and I want to bring it back to people's consciousness. I want people to start thinking about their food differently. I don't want them to say the only part of the cauliflower I eat are the florets and everything else is garbage. The whole plant is edible. You know, you can eat the core, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the stems of the leaves, and you can make stuff with them. And I think by changing consumer behavior and people just shifting their perspective, even just a millimeter, will get people to kind of go, oh, what can I do with this? And by doing that, especially in a time of food insecurity, which the pandemic has shone a huge light on, that, you know, not only are you using the whole plant, but you're also saving a little bit of money. You're also saving the planet a little bit. You're also using a creative part of your brain you hadn't possibly known that you had, and just being a little bit more engaged with your food.
It's my whole life I've been a very aesthetic eater. Like if a vegetable doesn't look good, I would kind of be like, ooh, I'm not eating that little baby carrot, it looks funny. But funny enough, and I don't know how you feel about hunting or wild game, but I was watching a show called Meat Eater on Netflix over this pandemic, and the way they explained how they use the whole animal, whether it's the liver, the heart, he was eating the fat behind the eyes. I was like, it gave me, like you said, it gave me a new perspective on food, on kind of this food sustainability idea of, you know, using every part of the animal, and that you can make it delicious. And even if it's not super great, I mean, like a liver, I'm not a big fan of liver, but how nutrient dense it is, and how much you can get from it. I'm like,
Oh, do you like pate?
I've never really had it. Like, I think I've nibbled at it, but
so that's the challenge for me as the chef, and to me that is the mark of a great chef, is that if I can get you to eat something that you deem disgusting or inedible, and get you to go, oh my god, that was one of the best things I've ever eaten, or wow, what's in that, that is the mark of a great chef, because you are taking something that someone else would throw away and discard, and turning it into, you know, transforming it into something else. And that is one of my great passions. That is definitely the inspiration behind scrap cooking. It's how I like to hope that I live my life, in terms of, so it's using the whole animal. It's a way to honor the animal that gave its life, or the whole plant. And I just really want more people to just be conscious of it. It's hard to do. I'm not
Hmm.
saying it's what you lose in convenience, you pay for in time. So anything that's super cheap, in terms of vegetables or meat, you need to make up for in amount of time that you're putting to make it delicious. So you can buy things that are, ready made, and what you save in time, you spend in money. It's sort of, there's this spectrum of, it's time or money.
Hmm.
So if you don't have one, you have the other, and if you don't have either, that's hard, but trying to find balance there.
Hmm. Before I let you go, I want to ask this question. We started with how tough a time restaurants are having right now, and we've talked a lot about food and the business and everything. We have some good news. Vaccines are being rolled out in the UK. We're supposed to get them soon in Canada. So we're almost there, but we're not quite there, and it's still going to be some struggle in terms of keeping businesses viable and going. So I'd like to end on, as like me as a consumer, how can I best help restaurants bridge this gap until we kind of get back to some sort of normalcy and more capacity in these restaurants? What are some things we can do to really help out our local restaurants?
The best thing that you can do is order directly from your restaurant and go pick it up, um, and bring it to your house. That way you're avoiding the charges to the delivery company via Uber Eats. Now, I still use Uber Eats and skip the dishes and stuff. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not railing against them in terms of the convenience. They're convenient, totally. That's why they're popular. But if you can, if you have the means to go pick it up, pick it up. But call the restaurant directly, because then they keep all of the money. If you feel comfortable dining in a restaurant, inside a restaurant, please go dine in a restaurant. If you don't feel comfortable, pick it up. If you don't feel comfortable picking it up, get it delivered. That's fine too. Some restaurants have in-house delivery, like Das Lokal. I'm not using Skip or Uber, so they often have myself deliver it. And just buy local as much as you can right now. Try to support any local maker, be it for Christmas gifts, for dining out, for wine. Lots of restaurants are doing bottle shops, and you know, there's all sorts of, just support local as much as possible. But and we really need it, and we need your support. We need to know that you want us to survive. And if you can, try to avoid going to the chains, because they're going to weather the storm, but everybody else is kind of out on a limb. But we really appreciate everybody's support that we've gotten so far. For
Mm.
sure, it's been great. We just need, basically, if we can all make it through the winter time when we're slow and we don't have the funding that we have made November, December, usually from our Christmas parties, to get us through January, February, and March. If we can make it through the end of March, I think we'll be okay.
Well, I think there's a charcuterie board with Ryan's name on it from Das Cal coming up in the near future, because that sounded delicious. But I can't think of a lot of better times than being out with my friends at restaurants for drinks and a nice meal. Like, I'm with you. Like, I'm on that boat. Like, I want restaurants to survive, and especially local, because that's where you get the real, like, someone like you who puts their heart and soul into every single dish and every menu item, and makes it special. um, so it's really important for me too. So I'm really happy to have you on and share that with people. If people want to know more about scrap cooking or your restaurants, yourself, where can they follow you and get more information?
Sure, yeah. So, my on Facebook, I'm Chef Harriet Clunie. On Instagram, I'm Harriet.Clunie. Scrap cooking. Hold on.
I know I have so many Instagram handles for all the
Well,
accounts.
Dash Local's got like 2 dead ones and 1 that is real, so I just want to make sure that I say the right one. So it's for the restaurant, the Instagram is Das Lokal Kitchen Bar, all one. And then Scrap Cooking is Scrap Cooking TV on Instagram. And it's Scrap Cooking on YouTube. And then you can also watch the show. It live streams on rogerstv.com at 8:30 on Sundays. And it's also on Rogers 22 if you happen to have cable, but none of my friends do.
So 8:30 at night or 8:30 in the morning?
8:30 p.m.
Per PM, perfect. So beautiful Sunday night, family watch, get some good food ideas. I love it.
Yeah, it's fun.
Harriet, thank you so much for this. This was a real treat, not to use a restaurant term, but I really appreciate it, and all the best in the future.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure coming on your show, and I wish you an amazing 2021 and to hell with 2020.
I hear you. Thank you. Take care.
Okay.